The blood on Austin Flint's knuckles hadn't even dried when he pulled Zelda Sullivan onto the dance floor. And in that moment, with the fiddle playing and the whole town watching, both their lives changed forever. The evening had started innocently enough. Zelda had spent 3 hours getting ready for the social, carefully pressing the blue calico dress her mother had sewn for her, pinning her dark brown hair into an elegant twist that showed off the graceful curve of her neck. At 22 years old, she had long since accepted that her fuller figure didn't match the willowy frames celebrated in the fashion plates from back east, but tonight she had felt beautiful anyway. Her younger sister Maggie had told her the blue fabric made her eyes look like summer sky, and for once, Zelda had allowed herself to believe it might be true. Taylorsville, Utah in the spring of 1883 was a growing community, nestled in the Salt Lake Valley with the Wasatch Mountains rising majestically to the east. The town had been founded by Mormon settlers decades earlier, but by now it held a mixed population of farmers, merchants, miners passing through, and ranch hands from the surrounding cattle operations. The monthly social dances were held in the largest barn on the Peterson property, and nearly everyone attended. It was one of the few entertainment options available, and people came from miles around. Zelda had arrived with her parents and Maggie just as the sun was setting, painting the mountain peaks in shades of rose and gold. The barn had been decorated with wildflowers and lanterns, and the musicians were already tuning their instruments. She had felt a flutter of nervous excitement in her stomach, the same feeling she got every time she attended one of these gatherings. Part of her hoped someone might ask her to dance, while another part braced for disappointment. Austin Flint had ridden into town that very afternoon. At 26, he was the new foreman at the Fletcher Ranch, hired to help manage their expanding cattle operation. He was tall and lean, with sun-weathered skin and dark hair that fell across his forehead when he removed his hat. His eyes were an unusual shade of gray-green, and when he smiled, which wasn't often, a dimple appeared in his left cheek. He had grown up in Montana, working ranches since he was 14, and he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who knew his own capabilities. He hadn't particularly wanted to attend the social. After a long day of riding fence lines and meeting the ranch crew, he would have preferred a hot meal and his bedroll. But his new employer, William Fletcher, had insisted. "You need to meet folks," Fletcher had said firmly. "You're going to be working with their sons and brothers. They need to know you're a decent man." So Austin had washed up, put on his cleanest shirt, and ridden into town as the first stars appeared overhead. The barn was already crowded when he arrived, filled with the sounds of laughter and music. He found a spot along the wall, accepted a cup of punch from a friendly woman who introduced herself as Sister Morrison, and settled in to observe. That was when he first saw Zelda. She was standing with a group of young women near the refreshment table, and something about her caught his attention immediately. Maybe it was the way she threw back her head when she laughed, or the animated way she gestured when she spoke. She had a presence, a vitality that seemed to light up the space around her. He found himself watching her without meaning to, noting the curves of her figure, the sparkle in her eyes, the generous warmth of her smile. The evening progressed with several dances. Austin was asked to partner with a few of the local girls, their mothers clearly sizing him up as potential husband material. He was polite but reserved, conscious of being the newcomer. Between dances, he noticed that Zelda sat out most of the sets. A few men asked her to dance, but not many. He saw the way her smile dimmed slightly each time a young man walked past her to ask someone else. It stirred something protective in his chest, though he couldn't have explained why. Then came the incident that changed everything. A group of cowboys from a neighboring ranch had been drinking heavily, passing a flask outside the barn and returning progressively louder and more boisterous. Their ringleader was a man named Dale Hutchins, thick-built and mean-spirited, the kind of man who thought cruelty was funny. Austin had met plenty of his type over the years and had learned to keep his distance. The musicians had just finished a lively reel, and people were catching their breath when Dale's voice rang out across the barn. "Well now, boys, look at that. Zelda Sullivan actually wore her dancing dress. That's like putting a ribbon on a sew and calling it a show horse." The barn fell silent. Every conversation stopped mid-sentence. Zelda, who had been standing near the punch bowl, went completely still. The color drained from her face, then rushed back in a hot flood of humiliation. Around her, people looked away, embarrassed for her but unwilling to confront Dale and his friends. "I'm serious," Dale continued, emboldened by the attention and the whiskey. "Girl that size should know better than to squeeze herself into a dress like that. Ain't nobody wants to dance with someone who'd crush their feet." His companions laughed. Ugly sounds that echoed in the stillness. Zelda's eyes filled with tears, but she held them back through sheer force of will. She had endured Dale's nastiness before, his casual cruelties whenever their paths crossed, but never so publicly. She wanted to disappear, to sink through the floor, to be anywhere but standing in that barn with every eye upon her. Her hands trembled as she set down her cup. "That is quite enough." The voice was quiet but carried clearly. Austin stepped away from the wall, his face hard as granite. "You owe the lady an apology." Dale turned, sizing up this newcomer with a sneer. "Who the hell are you?" "Austin Flint. I work for Fletcher Ranch as of today." "And you're going to apologize to Miss Sullivan right now?" "Or what?" Dale was bigger than Austin by at least 30 pounds, and he was used to intimidating people. "You going to make me stranger?" "Yes." Austin's voice remained level. "I am." Something in his tone, in the set of his shoulders, made Dale hesitate, but he had an audience and too much pride to back down. "Listen, friend, I don't know how things work where you're from, but around here a man can speak his mind. If that girl can't handle a little truth, that's her problem." Austin moved so fast that most people missed it. One moment he was standing 5 feet away, the next his fist connected with Dale's jaw with a crack that sounded like breaking wood. Dale staggered backward, hit the refreshment table, and went down hard, sending cups and plates crashing to the floor. The barn erupted in chaos. Dale's friends surged forward, but William Fletcher and several other ranchers stepped between them and Austin. "That's enough." Fletcher's voice boomed with authority. "Dale Hutchins, you and your boys clear out right now. You're not welcome here tonight." Dale struggled to his feet, his jaw already swelling, murder in his eyes. But he was outnumbered and he knew it. "This isn't over," he spat at Austin, then jerked his head at his companions. They filed out into the night, their departure watched by the entire gathering. Fletcher turned to Austin with a look that was half exasperation, half approval. "Not how I expected your first night in town to go, but I can't say the boy didn't have it coming. Dale Hutchins has been a menace for years." He raised his voice to address the room. "Well, don't just stand there gawking. We've got musicians and a perfectly good barn. Let's have some dancing." The fiddler, after a moment's hesitation, struck up a waltz. Gradually, the conversations resumed and couples moved back onto the floor. But Austin's attention was focused entirely on Zelda, who stood frozen by the ruined refreshment table, tears now streaming freely down her cheeks. He crossed to her and extended his hand, his bruised knuckles stark in the lantern light. "Miss Sullivan, would you do me the honor of this dance?" She stared at him, unable to process what had just happened. This stranger had defended her, had struck a man for insulting her, and now he was asking her to dance as if it were the most natural thing in the world. You don't have to. Her voice came out as barely a whisper. I know I don't have to. His eyes met hers and she saw nothing but genuine warmth there. I want to, please. Slowly, hardly daring to believe this was real, Zelda placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm and calloused and steady, and he led her onto the floor. People parted to make room for them, and then Austin's arm was around her waist and they were moving to the music. Zelda had danced before, of course, but never like this. Austin was a beautiful dancer, smooth and confident, guiding her through the turns with easy grace. He held her as if she were precious, and when she dared to look up at his face, she found him smiling down at her with that rare dimple showing. I'm Austin, he said. Austin Flint, Zelda Sullivan. Her voice was stronger now. You didn't have to do that. Hit him, I mean. Yes, I did. There was no doubt in his tone. No man should speak to a woman that way, and certainly not to you. You don't even know me. Then I guess we should spend the evening fixing that. The waltz ended, but instead of escorting her off the floor, Austin kept her hand in his as the next dance began. And the next. And the next. They danced through the entire remainder of the social. Austin didn't dance with anyone else, and he made it clear through his attention that he had no interest in doing so. They talked as they moved together, their conversation flowing as naturally as the music. Zelda learned that Austin had lost his parents young, that he had been working cattle ranches since he was barely more than a boy, that he had come to Utah seeking steadier work and a place to maybe put down roots. Austin learned that Zelda had been born in Taylorsville, that she taught reading to the younger children in town, that she loved books and had dreams of someday seeing the ocean. The ocean, Austin repeated, as if trying to imagine it. That's a powerful long way from here. I know. Zelda's eyes went distant for a moment. But I've read about it. The way the waves sound, the salt in the air, the endless horizon. Don't you ever want to see something beyond mountains and rangeland? Maybe. He spun her through a turn and she laughed, breathless. But mountains and rangeland have their own beauty, especially tonight. She blushed, understanding that he wasn't just talking about the landscape. Her heart was beating so hard she was sure he must feel it. This couldn't be real. Men didn't look at her the way Austin was looking at her. They didn't hold her like she was delicate and important. They certainly didn't punch other men for insulting her and then dance with her all night. But it was real. As the evening wore on, Zelda stopped questioning it and simply let herself feel. Feel the security of Austin's arms around her, the warmth of his attention, the growing connection between them that seemed to strengthen with every shared smile and whispered comment. When he told her a story about a stubborn bull on a ranch in Montana, she laughed so hard she nearly stumbled, and his arm tightened around her waist to steady her. When she told him about the little boy she was teaching to read who insisted on pronouncing every silent letter, his whole face lit up with amusement. Around them, the other dancers couldn't help but notice. Zelda's mother watched with cautious hope, while Maggie practically glowed with vicarious excitement. William Fletcher exchanged a knowing look with his wife, both of them recognizing something special when they saw it. Even the musicians seemed to play with extra feeling, as if they too were caught up in the romance unfolding on their dance floor. As midnight approached and the social began to wind down, Austin finally led Zelda off the floor. Her feet ached and her face hurt from smiling, but she had never felt more alive. They stepped outside into the cool spring air and she inhaled deeply, trying to steady herself. "Thank you," she said softly, looking up at the stars scattered across the vast Utah sky. "For everything." "I'll never forget tonight, Zelda." Austin said her name like it mattered. "Would you allow me to call on you, properly, I mean? She turned to face him, searching his expression in the moonlight. "Why?" The question came out more plaintively than she intended. "I need to understand why." "You could have any girl in that barn." "I don't want any girl in that barn." He reached out and gently tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, his touch sending shivers through her. "I want to know you. The woman who teaches children to read, who dreams about the ocean, who laughed at my terrible stories. The woman who held her head high even when someone tried to tear her down. I've been around plenty of women, Zelda. Pretty faces and nice dresses, but you have something real. Something that matters." Tears sprang to her eyes again, but these were different tears. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, you can call on me." His smile in that moment was worth every cruel word Dale Hutchins had ever said, worth every dance she had sat out, worth every doubt she had ever had about herself. "Tomorrow?" he asked. "Would tomorrow be too soon?" She laughed, a sound of pure joy. "Tomorrow would be perfect." He did call the next day, arriving at the Sullivan home in the late afternoon with wildflowers he had picked along the road. Zelda's parents, Thomas and Mary Sullivan, welcomed him with the careful courtesy reserved for potential suitors. Thomas, a carpenter by trade, was protective of his daughters but recognized sincerity when he saw it. Mary, more openly warm, invited Austin to stay for supper. The meal was simple but good, pot roast with vegetables from their garden. Austin complimented the cooking, answered questions about his work and background with honest directness, and made a visible effort to be respectful and proper. But his eyes kept drifting to Zelda, and hers to him, and the connection between them was obvious to everyone at the table. After supper, with Mary's permission, Austin and Zelda walked through the town as the sun set. Taylorsville was quiet in the evening, the streets mostly empty. They talked more easily now, the conversation from the previous night continuing as if there had been no interruption. Austin told her about his dreams of having his own ranch someday. Nothing big, just enough land for a small herd and a good house. Zelda shared her frustrations with being seen as just the heavy girl, her desire to be valued for her mind and heart. "Anyone who can't see your value is a fool," Austin said firmly. They had stopped near the town's small park under the branches of a cottonwood tree. "You're smart and kind and beautiful, Zelda. I saw that the moment I laid eyes on you. Beautiful." She couldn't keep the skepticism from her voice. "Austin, I know what I look like. I'm not a delicate flower." "No, you're not." He stepped closer, his voice dropping to something almost tender. "You're strong and real and curved in all the right places. You're beautiful like the mountains are beautiful, like a sunset is beautiful, solid and true." He reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "I'm not good with fancy words, but I know what I see, and what I see is a woman I already can't stop thinking about." Zelda's breath caught. No one had ever spoken to her this way. She looked up into his face, seeing the sincerity there, the genuine admiration. "I can't stop thinking about you either," she admitted. "Even though I barely know you, it doesn't make sense. Some things don't have to make sense." His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "My mother used to say that the heart knows before the head catches up. I always thought that was romantic nonsense, but maybe she was right." They stood there in the gathering darkness, connected by their joined hands and the electricity flowing between them. Austin wanted to kiss her, wanted it more than he had wanted anything in a long time, but it was too soon. So instead, he reluctantly released her hand and offered his arm. "I should get you home before your father comes looking for me with a shotgun." She laughed and took his arm, and they walked back through the quiet streets. At her door, he said goodbye with a promise to return soon, and Zelda went inside feeling like she was floating. The courtship that followed was intense and consuming. Austin came to see Zelda every chance he got, which wasn't easy given his demanding work schedule. The spring cattle drive kept him in the saddle for long days, and there were fences to mend, calves to brand, 1,000 tasks that made up the life of a ranch foreman. But he carved out time, riding into town whenever he could spare a few hours. They picnicked by the creek that ran through the valley, Zelda bringing food she had cooked herself and Austin bringing stories from the ranch. He taught her about cattle and horses, about reading weather signs and tracking. She lent him books, delighting in his hunger to learn, in the way he discussed the stories with her as if her opinions mattered deeply. One Sunday, Austin attended church with the Sullivans. The small chapel was packed, as it always was, and there were curious glances when he sat with Zelda's family. Dale Hutchins was there with his parents, his jaw still slightly bruised. He glared daggers at Austin throughout the service, but made no move to confront him. After church, on the steps outside, Dale's mother approached, Mr. Flint. Helena Hutchins was a thin, pinched woman who looked like she had been sucking lemons. "I hope you're proud of yourself, striking my son." Austin removed his hat respectfully but met her gaze steadily. "Madam, I regret that it came to violence, but I don't regret defending Miss Sullivan's honor. If your son had behaved like a gentleman, there would have been no need for my intervention." Several people nearby nodded in agreement. Helena's face flushed, but before she could respond, her husband Earl stepped up and took her arm. "Come along, Helena. The boy's got a point." He looked at Austin with something like approval. "A man stands up for what's right, can't fault him for that." As the Hutchins family walked away, Zelda squeezed Austin's hand gratefully. "You keep making enemies on my account," she murmured. "Worth it." He smiled down at her. "Every time." As spring turned to summer, their relationship deepened. Austin was falling in love truly and completely. Everything about Zelda amazed him. Her intelligence, her compassion, the way she saw the good in people. She was endlessly patient with the children she taught, creative in finding ways to help them learn. She cared for her aging grandparents without complaint, brought food to families when someone was sick, volunteered to help with every community project. She had a generous heart, and Austin felt privileged every time she turned that generosity toward him. For Zelda, loving Austin was both thrilling and terrifying. She had never expected to find someone who saw her the way he did, who valued her so completely. But she was afraid to believe it would last. Late at night, she lay awake wondering when he would realize he could do better, when the novelty would wear off and he would see her as everyone else did. But Austin never wavered. If anything, he became more openly devoted as the weeks passed. He brought her small gifts, wildflowers or interesting rocks he found on the range. He praised her cooking, even when she tried new recipes that didn't quite work. He listened to her read aloud from her favorite books, watching her face more than anything else. And when they were alone, he held her hand, touched her face, looked at her like she was the answer to every question he had ever asked. One evening in late June, they rode out together to watch the sunset from a hill overlooking the valley. Austin had borrowed a gentle mare for Zelda, and they climbed to the top of the rise as the sky turned to fire. Taylorsville spread below them, small and peaceful, with the great mountains standing guard in the distance. "I love this place," Zelda said softly, dismounting and moving to the edge to take in the view. "I was born here, and I've never been anywhere else, but I can't imagine living anywhere better." Austin came to stand beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "It's a good place to build a life," he agreed. Then, his voice roughening slightly, "Zelda, I need to tell you something." She turned to look at him, her heart suddenly pounding. His expression was serious, almost nervous, and she braced herself. This was it. This was when he would tell her it had been a nice few months, but he was moving on, that they could be friends, that she shouldn't have expected anything more. "I'm in love with you." The words came out in a rush, like he had been holding them back and they could no longer be contained. "I know it's fast. I know we've only known each other a few months, but I can't pretend anymore. I'm completely, hopelessly in love with you. The way you laugh, the way you think, the way you care about everyone around you. When I'm with you, I'm the best version of myself. When I'm not with you, I'm just counting the hours until I see you again." Zelda stared at him, unable to speak. Tears spilled over and ran down her cheeks, and Austin looked alarmed. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you, I just had to tell you the truth. I love you too." The words burst from her like a dam breaking. "I love you so much it scares me. I keep waiting for you to change your mind, to realize you made a mistake. But I love you, Austin. I think I started loving you the moment you took my hand that first night." Relief and joy flooded his face. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs wiping away her tears. "I will never change my mind. You are everything I want, everything I need." And then he kissed her. It was gentle at first, questioning, and then deeper as she responded. Her arms went around his neck and his around her waist, pulling her close against him. The kiss held all the weeks of restraint, all the growing feelings, all the promise of the future. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Austin rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he whispered. "I know I should wait, I should ask your father first, I should do this properly, but marry me, Zelda, be my wife, build a life with me." "Yes." She didn't hesitate. "Yes, Austin, yes to everything." They held each other as the sun finished setting and the stars began to appear, two people who had found in each other something rare and precious. When they finally rode back to town, their horses moving slowly through the warm summer night, they were engaged. Thomas Sullivan gave his blessing readily when Austin formally asked the next day. "I know you haven't been in town long," Thomas said, shaking Austin's hand firmly. "But I've seen how you treat my daughter. I've asked around about you, and everyone at Fletcher Ranch speaks highly of your character. You have my permission and my blessing." Mary Sullivan hugged Austin like he was already her son. "Welcome to the family," she said warmly. "You've made Zelda happier than I've ever seen her. That's all a mother can ask for." The wedding was planned for early September, after the summer work, but before the fall cattle drive. It would be held in the same chapel where Austin had attended church with the Sullivans, with a reception at the Peterson barn, the site of their first meeting. Zelda threw herself into preparations with Maggie's enthusiastic help. Her wedding dress was cream-colored silk, carefully sewn by her mother and Maggie working together, with lace trim and pearl buttons. It was the most beautiful thing Zelda had ever owned. Austin, for his part, worked harder than ever at the ranch, determined to prove his worth to William Fletcher. He had confided his dreams of someday owning land, and Fletcher had been encouraging. "You're a good foreman, Austin. Best I've had in years. You keep up this level of work, and I'll help you get started when you're ready. Good men deserve good opportunities." The summer days blurred together in a haze of work and love and planning. Austin and Zelda stole moments together whenever possible, their kisses growing more heated, their restraint harder to maintain. They talked endlessly about their future, about the house they would have, the children they hoped for, the life they would build together. "I want at least 4 children," Zelda said one evening as they sat on her parents' porch swing. "Maybe 5. Austin grinned. "That sounds about right. I always wanted a big family, never had siblings of my own. What do you want to name them?" She was leaning against his shoulder, his arm around her waist. "I figure we'll decide together when the time comes." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "But I like strong names, Good solid names that mean something. Agreed. She tilted her face up to his. Although I reserve the right to veto anything too outlandish. He laughed and kissed her properly, the swing creaking gently beneath them. Inside the house, Mary looked out the window and smiled at the sight of them together. Her daughter had found love, real and lasting love. It was everything a mother could hope for. The first week of September arrived with perfect weather, warm days and cool nights. The entire town buzzed with excitement about the upcoming wedding. Zelda Sullivan and Austin Flint had become something of a local legend, their story told and retold, embellished with each telling. The stranger who had defended the girl's honor, the romance that had bloomed from that moment, the obvious devotion between them. People loved a good love story, and this was certainly that. The day before the wedding, Austin's hands shook slightly as he shaved and put on his best clothes for the rehearsal. He had faced down angry bulls, dangerous storms, and hostile men without flinching, but the thought of standing before the whole town tomorrow and pledging his life to Zelda made him nervous. Not because he doubted his choice, but because he wanted everything to be perfect for her. The rehearsal went smoothly, with the minister walking them through the ceremony and everyone practicing their roles. Afterward, there was a small supper at the Sullivan home. Zelda's extended family had come from surrounding areas, filling the house with noise and laughter. Austin was welcomed warmly, accepted immediately as one of their own. Late that evening, Austin and Zelda walked one last time as an unmarried couple through the quiet streets. The moon was nearly full, bathing everything in silver light. "Tomorrow," Zelda said wonderingly. "Tomorrow I'll be your wife." "Tomorrow," Austin confirmed, pulling her close. "I can't wait. I've been dreaming about tomorrow since the day we met." "Do you ever think about that night?" She looked up at him. "About how different things could have been? What if you hadn't been there? What if you had decided not to come to the social?" "I try not to think about it." His voice was serious. "But sometimes I do, and it terrifies me. All the ways we might never have met, all the chances that had to line up just right." He touched her face tenderly. "But we did meet. And nothing is going to keep us apart now." They kissed goodnight at her door with more passion than was probably proper for the evening before their wedding, reluctantly separating when Thomas cleared his throat loudly from inside. Austin walked back to the boarding house where he was staying with a grin on his face and his heart full. The wedding day dawned clear and beautiful. Zelda woke early, her stomach a tangle of nerves and excitement. Mary and Maggie helped her into her dress, carefully arranging her hair and adjusting the simple veil. When Zelda looked at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the glowing woman staring back. "You're radiant," Mary said, tears in her eyes. "My beautiful daughter." "Mother, don't cry, you'll make me cry, and then my face will be all blotchy," Zelda said, but her own eyes were already damp. Maggie hugged her carefully, mindful of the dress. "You deserve this," she whispered. "You deserve all the happiness in the world." At the chapel, Austin stood at the front with the minister, his heart pounding. William Fletcher stood beside him as his best man, and the church was packed with what seemed like the entire town. He barely saw any of them. His eyes were fixed on the door, waiting. And then the music changed, and there she was. Zelda on her father's arm, walking down the aisle toward him, and Austin forgot how to breathe. She was more beautiful than he had ever seen her, the cream dress perfect against her skin, her dark hair shining, her eyes locked on his. She was smiling, that radiant smile that had captured his heart from the very beginning. Thomas placed Zelda's hand in Austin's with a meaningful look. "Take care of her," he said quietly. "With my life," Austin promised. The ceremony passed in a blur. Austin heard himself making vows, heard Zelda's voice responding, strong and clear. He slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, and she did the same for him. And then the minister was pronouncing them husband and wife, and Austin was kissing his bride while the congregation erupted in applause. They walked back down the aisle together, married, and the joy on both their faces made more than one person reach for a handkerchief. Outside the chapel, they were showered with rice and good wishes. Austin lifted Zelda into the wagon that would carry them to the reception, climbing up beside her and taking the reins. As they drove toward the Peterson barn, she leaned against his shoulder. "We did it," she said softly. "We're married." "Best decision I ever made," he replied, pressing a kiss to her hair. The reception was exactly what they had hoped for. The barn was decorated even more beautifully than it had been for the social where they met. There was food and music and dancing, and everyone was in high spirits. Austin and Zelda had their first dance as husband and wife to the same waltz they had danced that first night, and the symbolism was lost on no one. Throughout the evening, people came to congratulate them and wish them well. Even Dale Hutchins' father Earl shook Austin's hand and told him, "You're a good man. Treat her right." There was no sign of Dale himself, which suited everyone just fine. As the sun set and lanterns were lit, Austin and Zelda slipped away from the party. They had been given the use of a small house on the Fletcher property, a wedding gift from Austin's employer until they could find their own place. It was only 2 rooms, but it was private and it was theirs. Inside, alone together for the first time as husband and wife, they stood looking at each other in the lamplight. Austin reached out and slowly began removing the pins from Zelda's hair, letting the dark waves fall around her shoulders. She closed her eyes at his touch, her breath quickening. "I love you," he said, his voice rough with emotion and desire. "I love you so much, Zelda Flint." She opened her eyes and smiled at her new name. "I love you, Austin, always." What followed was tender and passionate, a joining that sealed what they had promised before God and the community. Austin was gentle and patient, and Zelda responded to him with a passion that matched his own. They came together as they had done everything else, with honesty and love and a deep sense of rightness. Afterward, wrapped in each other's arms in the narrow bed, they talked quietly into the night. About their dreams for the future, about the life they would build, about how lucky they both felt. Eventually, they drifted off to sleep, Zelda's head on Austin's shoulder, his arms holding her close. The months that followed were an adjustment. Learning to live together, to navigate the small frictions of daily life, to balance Austin's demanding work with building their home together. But they approached it all with good humor and deep commitment to each other. Their little house became a haven, filled with laughter and love. Zelda continued teaching the children, now as Mrs. Flint. The young students were fascinated by her marriage, and she found herself answering endless questions about weddings and love. Austin worked long hours at the ranch but always came home to her, always greeted her like she was the best thing he would see all day. In December, Zelda discovered she was pregnant. She told Austin one evening after supper, nervous about his reaction. They had talked about children, of course, but this was so soon. They barely had any savings. The little house was tiny, but Austin's face lit up like sunrise. He pulled her into his arms and spun her around, laughing with pure joy. "A baby," he kept saying. "We're having a baby. You're happy?" Zelda asked, relief flooding through her. "Happy, I'm thrilled, terrified but thrilled." He set her down gently, suddenly cautious. "Should I not have spun you? Can I still hug you? What do you need?" She laughed at his sudden nervousness. "I'm pregnant, not fragile, but yes, you can hug me." "Please hug me." He did, holding her close and safe. "We're going to be parents," he said wonderingly. "You're going to be such an incredible mother." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Austin became even more protective, insisting Zelda rest more, not lift anything heavy. She tolerated his fussing with amused patience, knowing it came from love. As her body changed, growing rounder with their child, she had moments of self-consciousness. But Austin made it clear he found her more beautiful than ever, his hands gentle on her swelling belly, his kisses reverent. William Fletcher, true to his word, approached Austin in early spring with a proposal. There was a parcel of land adjacent to the Fletcher Ranch, about 100 acres with a creek running through it. The owner was selling to move back east. Fletcher offered to co-sign a loan for Austin and to throw in 10 head of cattle as a wedding gift. "I want good neighbors," Fletcher said, "and you're as good as they come. Besides, I'm not getting any younger. Knowing I've got a reliable operation next door gives me peace of mind." Austin was overwhelmed. This was his dream, happening faster than he had dared hope. He talked to Zelda that night, laying out the financial realities, the risks, the hard work it would require. She listened carefully and then said simply, "Let's do it. Let's build our ranch." They purchased the land in April 1884, just weeks before their first child was born. It was a son, healthy and loud, with his father's eyes and his mother's dark hair. They named him Thomas Austin Flint, after both his grandfathers. Austin held his son for the first time with shaking hands and tears streaming down his face. "He's perfect," he whispered. "Zelda, he's perfect. We made him," she said softly, exhausted but glowing. "We made this little person." The first year of parenthood was exhausting and wonderful. Little Thomas, Tommy for short, was a demanding baby who rarely slept through the night. But watching Austin with their son, seeing the gentle patience and clear devotion, made Zelda fall in love with her husband all over again. He changed diapers without complaint, walked the floor with a crying baby at 2 in the morning, sang off key lullabies that somehow always worked. They broke ground on their new property that summer, beginning the long process of building a house and establishing their ranch. It was back-breaking work, made harder by caring for an infant, but they were building something lasting, something that would be theirs. The house rose slowly, a solid structure of wood and stone that would hold their growing family. Austin did most of the construction himself, with help from neighbors and Fletcher Ranch hands on weekends. By Tommy's first birthday, the house was finished enough to move into. It had 4 rooms downstairs and a sleeping loft above, with a big fireplace and windows that looked out over their land. The day they moved in, Zelda stood in the main room with Tommy on her hip and tears in her eyes. "It's ours," she said. "Really ours." Austin came up behind her and wrapped his arms around both of them. "Our home," he agreed. "First of many good days here." He was right. Their ranch, which they named the Double F for Flint family, slowly grew. Austin proved to be a natural cattleman, with an eye for good stock and the patience to build his herd carefully. Zelda managed the household and helped with the ranch work when she could, all while caring for Tommy. They worked from dawn to dusk, but they worked together, partners in every sense. Their second child, a daughter they named Margaret Rose after both grandmothers, was born in 1886. She was a calmer baby than Tommy had been, with her mother's smile and a sunny disposition. Tommy, now a toddler, was fascinated by his little sister and tried to help in ways that were more hindrance than assistance. But he was gentle with her, and Zelda's heart swelled watching her children together. The years passed in the rhythm of ranch life. Calving season and branding, haying and fence mending, the endless cycle of work that sustained them. The Double F prospered modestly but steadily. They were never rich, but they had enough. More importantly, they had each other and their growing family. A third child, Another son they named William Fletcher Flint after Austin's benefactor, arrived in 1888. By then, the ranch was well established, and they could afford to hire occasional help during busy seasons. Tommy, at 4, was already following his father around, mimicking everything Austin did. Maggie, as they called Margaret, was a bright and curious 2-year-old who asked endless questions, and Baby will completed their family perfectly. Or so they thought until Zelda discovered she was pregnant again in 1890. This pregnancy was harder than the previous ones, and Austin worried constantly. But in early 1891, they welcomed their 4th child, another daughter. They named her Anne Catherine, and she looked exactly like Zelda had as a baby. Their home was full of noise and love and laughter. Austin was the father he had always wanted to be, present and involved, teaching his children about the land and animals, but also about kindness and respect. Zelda was endlessly patient, somehow managing to keep track of 4 active children while also running the household and contributing to the ranch work. On Sundays, they went to church as a family, the 6 of them filling a whole pew. The years continued to pass. Tommy grew into a serious, responsible boy who loved the ranch and clearly intended to follow in his father's footsteps. Maggie showed an early talent for drawing and a love of books like her mother. Will was the daredevil, always climbing things and giving his parents heart attacks. And little Annie was the charmer, able to wrap everyone around her tiny finger. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1893, Austin and Zelda celebrated quietly after putting the children to bed. They sat on the porch of their house, watching the stars and holding hands like they had that first summer. "Can you believe it's been 10 years?" Zelda marveled. "It feels like yesterday and forever ago at the same time." "Best 10 years of my life," Austin said. "Every single day with you and our kids, even the hard days, especially the hard days because we got through them together." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Do you ever think about that first night, about the social, all the time?" He kissed the top of her head. "I think about what a gift that was, being in the right place at the right time, getting to defend you, getting to dance with you. I knew that night my life was changing. Mine too." She looked up at him, her eyes shining in the moonlight. "You gave me so much, Austin. Not just this life, this ranch, our children. You gave me confidence. You made me believe I was worth loving exactly as I am. You were always worth loving." His voice was fierce. "Anyone who couldn't see that was blind. I just had eyes to see what was already there." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of their ranch. An owl hooting in the distance, the low of cattle, the wind moving through the grass. Finally, Zelda spoke again. "Are you happy, truly happy?" Austin considered the question seriously. "I am," he said. "Not every moment is easy. The work is hard, money is sometimes tight, the kids test us every day, but yes, I'm happy, because I'm doing it all with you." She smiled and snuggled closer. "Me too. Happier than I ever imagined I could be." Inside the house, Tommy stirred in his sleep and called out. Zelda started to rise, but Austin held her back. "I'll go," he said. "You stay here and enjoy the quiet." She watched him go inside, this man who had defended her honor, danced with her all night, and then spent the next 10 years proving every single day that his love was real and lasting. She heard his low voice soothing their son, heard Tommy settle back into sleep. When Austin returned, he sat back down and pulled her close. "Where were we?" he asked with a smile. "Right here," she said. "Exactly where we're supposed to be." The years that followed brought new challenges and joys. Tommy, at 13 in 1897, was becoming a capable ranch hand, taking on more responsibility. Maggie, at 11, had started helping teach younger children at the town school, following in her mother's footsteps. Will, at 9, was finally channeling his energy into useful work, though he still gave them scares regularly. And Annie, at 6, was starting school and showing signs of her father's gentle nature. Austin and Zelda, now in their mid-30s, looked back on their journey with deep satisfaction. The ranch was thriving, their children were healthy and happy, and their love had only deepened with time. The passion of their early days had matured into something even richer, a bone-deep partnership and understanding that sustained them through everything. They had remained active in the Taylorsville community, hosting church socials at their ranch, helping neighbors in need, contributing to the town's growth. Austin had served on the town council and helped mediate disputes. Zelda had continued her teaching work and organized a lending library for the community. They were respected and valued, not just for what they had built, but for who they were. One day in the summer of 1898, they received word that Dale Hutchins had died in a bar fight in a town 300 miles away. He had left Taylorsville years earlier after one too many drunken incidents, and few people had mourned his departure. Zelda felt sadness at the news, at a life wasted, and a man who had never found his better nature. But Austin just held her hand and reminded her that they had built something good from that long-ago confrontation, and that was what mattered. As the 19th century drew to a close, the Flint family looked toward the new century with hope and confidence. Tommy, now 16 and a young man, had started courting a neighbor's daughter. Maggie, 14, had announced her intention to become a teacher. Will, 12, had discovered a talent for working with horses. And Annie, 9, was still their baby, though she protested the label vehemently. On a warm evening in September 1899, as they all gathered for Sunday supper, Austin looked around the table at his family and felt a rush of gratitude so strong it almost hurt. This life, these people, this love. It had all started with a moment of anger and compassion, a punch thrown and a dance offered. From that single night had grown everything that mattered. After supper, he pulled Zelda aside. "Walk with me." She smiled and took his hand, and they strolled out to the hill where he had first told her he loved her all those years ago. The view hadn't changed much. Taylorsville below, the mountains in the distance, the vast Utah sky overhead, but everything else had transformed. 16 years, Austin said, pulling her into his arms. 16 years since I first saw you at that social. Best 16 years imaginable, Zelda replied, resting her head against his chest. I want you to know something. He tilted her chin up so he could see her face. Every day I fall in love with you again. Every single day I look at you and think how lucky I am. You've given me everything, Zelda. A home, children, a purpose. But more than that, you've given me yourself, and that's the greatest gift I could ever receive. Tears filled her eyes. I love you so much. You changed my life that night, Austin. You saw me when no one else did, and you've kept seeing me, kept choosing me every day since. Always, he promised. For the rest of my life and whatever comes after, you're my forever, Zelda Flint. They kissed as the sun set, two people who had found their perfect match against all odds. Behind them, their home glowed with lamplight, filled with the laughter and voices of their children. Ahead of them, the new century waited with all its possibilities. And together, hand in hand, they were ready for whatever came next. The years continued to pass, each one adding to the tapestry of their life. In 1902, Tommy married his sweetheart, Sarah Fletcher, William Fletcher's granddaughter, creating an even stronger bond between the families. When Tommy and Sarah had their first child in 1903, Austin and Zelda became grandparents, a role they embraced with joy. Holding his grandson, Austin felt the circle of life completing itself in the most beautiful way. Maggie became a teacher as she had planned, beloved by her students for her patience and creativity. Will took over more and more of the ranch management as Austin began to slow down slightly, his body showing the years of hard work. Annie, the youngest, surprised everyone by showing a talent for healing and announced her intention to study nursing. Through it all, Austin and Zelda remained the center of their family, the foundation on which everything else was built. Their love story had become legendary in Taylorsville, told to new generations as an example of how true love could blossom from a single act of courage and kindness. The barn where they had met still stood, and sometimes, when there were dances, older residents would point out the spot where Austin had punched Dale Hutchins and then danced with Zelda all night. As they grew older, Austin and Zelda spent more time sitting on their porch, watching their grandchildren play in the yard, reflecting on the life they had built. They had faced hardships, certainly. There had been lean years when the cattle prices dropped, illnesses that scared them, losses of friends and family members. But through it all, they had each other, and that had been enough. On their 25th wedding anniversary in 1908, their children threw them a party that brought together the entire community. The celebration was held in the same Peterson barn where they had married, and as the evening drew to a close, Austin led Zelda onto the dance floor one more time. The musicians played the same waltz from that first night, and as they moved together, still perfectly in sync after all these years, there wasn't a dry eye in the barn. "Still the best dancer I've ever known," Zelda murmured, looking up at her husband. His hair was streaked with gray now, lines etched around his eyes, but to her, he was as handsome as the day they met. "Still the most beautiful woman I've ever seen," Austin replied, and meant it with every fiber of his being. They danced, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, by friends and neighbors, by the community that had embraced them. And as the music played and the night wore on, Austin thought back to that younger version of himself, the lonely cowboy who had walked into a barn and found his destiny. He sent up a silent prayer of thanks for the anger that had made him defend a stranger, for the impulse that had made him ask her to dance, for every choice that had led to this moment. The years that followed were gentle ones. Austin and Zelda, now in their 50s, stepped back from the day-to-day running of the ranch, letting Tommy and Will take over while they enjoyed a well-earned rest. They traveled a little, taking a trip to California where Zelda finally got to see the ocean she had dreamed about as a young woman. Standing on the shore with Austin's arm around her, watching the waves crash and recede, she felt a sense of completion. She had lived her dreams, not perhaps in the way she had once imagined, but in ways that were so much better. They had more grandchildren, watching their family grow and expand in wonderful directions. They hosted Sunday dinners that required multiple tables to seat everyone. Their house was always full of noise and life and love, exactly as they had hoped all those years ago. In the spring of 1920, as they approached their 65th birthdays, Austin and Zelda sat on their porch one evening much as they had so many times before. The ranch spread before them, prosperous and well managed by their sons. Their daughters came to visit regularly, bringing grandchildren and now great-grandchildren. The life they had built together had exceeded their wildest dreams. "You have any regrets?" Zelda asked, a question she hadn't asked in years. Austin was silent for a moment, considering. "Not a single one," he finally said. "Not one moment I would change, because even the hard times brought us here to this. Me neither." She leaned against him, still fitting perfectly into the curve of his shoulder after all these decades. "Except, maybe I wish I could have told that scared girl at the social that everything was going to be okay. that the man walking toward her would change her life in the most wonderful way. She didn't need to know, Austin said softly. She was brave enough to take my hand without knowing where it would lead. That's what made her so remarkable. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant colors. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and joys, more grandchildren to spoil, more work to oversee, more life to live. But tonight, they simply sat together, two souls who had found each other in a crowded barn on a spring night in 1883 and had never let go. Inside the house, they could hear their family gathering for supper, voices raised in laughter and conversation. Austin stood and offered his hand to Zelda, just as he had so many years ago. "Shall we join them, Mrs. Flint?" She smiled and took his hand, rising with his assistance. "Lead the way, Mr. Flint." They walked into their home hand in hand, surrounded by the love they had created, living proof that sometimes the greatest love stories start with a single act of courage and a willingness to see beyond the surface to the heart beneath. The cowboy who had punched a mocker and danced with a girl all night had found his forever, and the girl who had dared to believe she was worthy of love had built a life beyond her dreams. Together, they had created something beautiful and lasting, a legacy of love that would endure for generations to come. And as they sat down to dinner surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, they knew with absolute certainty that every step of their journey had been worth it.